My name is Abigail Hayes. I'm 36 years old, and up until last Friday, I was the chief architect behind a $3.4 billion government security system. For 8 years, I poured my soul into TechDynamics. I was their star player, the name behind their largest contract in company history, and the technical mind driving their innovation. And yet, they thought they could discard me like expired software, smile, shake my hand, and have security escort me out like I hadn't built the very system holding up their empire. But what they forgot, what they failed to account for, was that my name alone controlled everything, literally. And as I walked away that day, I could already see their smug expressions beginning to shift, turning to confusion and then panic, because the very core of their billion-dollar system was slipping through their fingers, and they had no idea what was coming. Before I dive into how I brought a powerful tech corporation to its knees, tell me where you're watching from, and make sure to hit that subscribe button if you're ready for a story of justice, betrayal, and one hell of a comeback. It all began at MIT, where I graduated with honors in computer science, specializing in security systems. Even as a student, I had a knack for spotting weaknesses others missed. While my classmates were buried in theory, I saw systems like living things, organisms with pressure points and instincts. My professors called it a gift. I called it common sense. While most of my peers were heading to flashy Silicon Valley startups or hedge funds, I was drawn to something more challenging: government infrastructure. The real backbone. The stuff that can't afford to fail. When TechDynamics offered me a junior developer role in 2015, I jumped on it. At the time, they were still mid-size, ambitious, innovative, and hungry. Their headquarters was a sleek glass building nestled in Northern Virginia, close enough to DC for high-level meetings, but just far enough to avoid the politics. I still remember my first day. The nerves, the thrill. I clipped my badge to my blazer like it was armor. Inside, the energy was contagious, collaborative, merit-driven. You brought good ideas, and you got heard. We weren't just employees, we were a team, building something that mattered. Marcus Bennett was already CEO. Charismatic, sharp, he had taken the company from a small contractor to a serious contender in federal security. He walked the floors regularly, greeting developers by name, asking real questions. Back then, I admired him. Stephanie Carter, the COO, became my mentor. She was 42, one of the few women in the executive ranks. She was brilliant, strategic, poised, and deeply respected. She took me under her wing, gave me opportunities far beyond my role, and often said, "You have a unique perspective, Abigail. Don't lose that." I didn't know then how quickly mentorship can turn into rivalry. About a year in, Ryan Wilson joined as CTO. He was flashy, with an impressive resume and an even bigger ego. He was great at talking tech to non-tech people. Suits loved him, but when it came to real code, he barely held his own. Still, he quickly became the golden boy. Executives paraded him in front of clients like a trophy. James Harrison, the CFO, stayed in the shadows. Numbers guy, cold and efficient. He didn't see employees. He saw cost centers and return on investment. Meetings with him were all metrics and budgets. If you weren't producing more than you cost, you were a liability. Diana Mitchell was the exception. She worked in legal and was just a few years older than me. Smart, sharp, with a way of breaking down contracts and legalese like it was everyday language. We bonded over late-night pizza during a tight deadline and became close friends. She was my only real confidant at TechDynamics, someone I trusted completely. My climb through the ranks was fast. Junior developer to team lead in a year, security architect in 2. I had a knack for predicting security threats before they hit the radar. My systems didn't just hold, they outperformed, under pressure, passed every test. Government clients started asking for me by name. I became the face of security at TechDynamics, whether they admitted it or not. The real turning point came in my 5th year, when the Department of Homeland Security announced a massive overhaul of its critical infrastructure protection, a 10-year contract worth $3.4 billion. The biggest project TechDynamics had ever pursued. Marcus put together a dream team to win it. I was named technical lead, and for 6 brutal months, we worked around the clock. I designed a groundbreaking system called Guardian, short for Government Unified Architecture for Resilient Defense Infrastructure and Network. It combined advanced encryption, adaptive threat response, and seamless integration across federal agencies. It wasn't just cutting edge, it was years ahead of anything else on the table. When the government requested in-person presentations, I delivered the technical portion. 3 hours of grilling from high-ranking officials, and I answered every question with confidence. I even suggested improvements to their security standards. Later, Marcus told me the committee chair had said my presentation sealed the deal. We won the contract. But there was a catch, a unique clause. Because of the critical nature of the system, the government required that the principal architect be explicitly named in the contract. Not just the company, but a person. One person to maintain oversight from design through maintenance. That person was me. My name, Abigail Hayes, was printed beside the federal government's signature. I was the system. At the time, it felt like the greatest professional honor of my life. Marcus told me not to worry. "It's a formality," he said at the celebration party, champagne in hand, his arm around my shoulder. "This is a win for all of us. The company stands behind you." If only I had paid attention to the way Diana hesitated when I showed her the contract, or how Stephanie's hug was a little too stiff, or how Ryan raised his glass with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, or how James was already calculating my dollar value behind that blank expression. Because as TechDynamics grew fat on the biggest win in its history, the culture shifted. New managers, new layers of bureaucracy, less collaboration, more competition, profit over innovation. I was too busy executing the Guardian rollout to notice the walls closing in. And I was too loyal, too proud, to believe the company I had helped build would ever see me as a threat. But they did, and they had already started planning how to remove me from the very system I created. The first sign that something was off came quietly, too quietly. It was about 6 months into the Guardian implementation. I showed up to the office early on a Tuesday, coffee in hand, ready to finalize a subsystem integration. That's when I noticed a high-level meeting underway in the conference room, a meeting I should have been in. Through the glass walls, I saw Marcus, Stephanie, Ryan, and several government liaisons poring over system architecture diagrams. My diagrams. I knocked once, opened the door, and every head in the room turned. The conversation halted like a needle scratching off vinyl. "Abigail," Stephanie said, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We didn't want to bother you with administrative details. You're too valuable writing code." Administrative details? I had designed Guardian from the ground up. There were no administrative decisions that didn't concern me. Still, I nodded and sat quietly, watching Ryan flip a document over just as I entered, as though I hadn't seen it. Later that day, I requested the meeting minutes. What I got back was a redacted version with key decisions blacked out. When I questioned it, Stephanie brushed it off as standard compartmentalization for government projects. But I had full top security clearance. There was no reason to compartmentalize anything from me. From that moment, things started to unravel quickly. Meeting invites stopped arriving in my inbox. Update schedules shifted without notice. My directives to my own team were overridden, sometimes without explanation, other times with contradictory orders from above. Stephanie, the woman who once championed me, now publicly second-guessed me. "Abigail's estimates are always so conservative," she'd say in executive meetings, chuckling like it was a joke. "We can definitely accelerate this phase." She had no technical background to make such calls, but as COO, her word carried weight. Ryan's betrayal was more direct. As CTO, he began requesting access to my secure code repositories, just for backup, he claimed. But Guardian already had triple redundant backups in accordance with government protocols. There was no legitimate reason for him to need access to the core system. I denied his request and cited the contract. Only the named principal architect, that's me, had oversight authority. The next day, Marcus called me into his office. "We can't have single points of failure," he said, voice calm, almost paternal. "Ryan needs to be able to step in if something happens to you." "If something happens to me," I echoed. "If you're sick, unavailable," he amended quickly. "This is too important to rest on one person's shoulders." I gave in, cautiously. I created a limited access account for Ryan, granting him visibility but not control. What he didn't know was that I embedded silent alerts. Anytime his account accessed a sensitive part of the system, I'd get a ping. Within days, those alerts were going off almost every night. He was trying to reverse engineer Guardian. Meanwhile, my team, the people I'd personally trained, was being stripped away one by one. Jessica, our encryption expert, reassigned to a commercial product. Tyler, who wrote the core threat monitoring algorithms, moved to sales support. When I protested to Stephanie, she smiled like I was a child hoarding toys. We need to distribute talent, Abigail. You can't hoard all the best people. By the 8th month of implementation, I'd lost half my original team. In their place came new hires, capable maybe, but lacking the experience and deep knowledge the project demanded. I was spending more time onboarding than engineering. Progress slowed, but the pressure increased. Deadlines were pushed forward arbitrarily. When I voiced concerns in meetings, I was met with exasperated sighs and spreadsheet lectures from James. Every week of delay cost the company, he'd say, waving charts like holy scripture. One day I finally snapped. In a tense executive meeting, I stood up. The personnel changes, the inconsistent directives, they're jeopardizing our delivery schedule. As the named architect, I'm formally requesting my original team be reinstated. All project decisions should route through me, per the contract. Marcus barely looked up. We appreciate your dedication, Abigail, but the contract is with TechDynamics, not with you personally. No, I said flatly. It names me specifically. Guardian isn't just a company asset, it's my design. The government selected it because of my expertise. The room fell uncomfortably silent. James shifted in his seat. Finally, he muttered, maybe we should have legal review the contract language again. That afternoon, I passed by the executive kitchen and overheard voices, Marcus, Stephanie, and James. They didn't see me. The system's nearly done, Marcus said. We've got the documentation and code base. Do we really need to keep carrying her salary? The contract specifies her role, James replied, but there are ways. Transition knowledge more cost-effectively. Ryan says he's mapped most of the architecture, Stephanie added. We could bring in junior developers at 1/3 of the cost. I froze, coffee mug in hand, heartbeat echoing in my ears. They were planning to cut me out. The very system I'd created, the architecture that existed only in my mind and on my designs, they were planning to steal it and move on without me. The next day, I received a calendar invite from Diana. Just her name, no subject, no details. When I walked into her office, she closed the door behind me. Her face was pale. They asked me to prepare these for you to sign, she said, sliding a folder across her desk. Inside were amended contract documents. They named Ryan Wilson as co-architect, giving him equal authority over Guardian. They're calling it a promotion, she said softly. Executive Technical Director. More oversight across departments. Less direct involvement in Guardian. And if I don't sign? She hesitated. I shouldn't be saying this, but they're building a performance case. The delays, engineered by them, they're blaming on you. They've already started the documentation. I sat quietly staring at the pages. Thank you for the warning, I finally said. I'll need time to review these thoroughly. That night I didn't go home. I stayed at the office, combing through every line of the original government contract, every internal memo, every version control log, every email. And I confirmed what I already knew. Any major changes to the system, its architecture, or its oversight required my written consent and the government's. They couldn't just edge me out, not legally. But I also knew they wouldn't stop trying. So I began documenting everything. The reassigned staff, the uninvited meetings, the silent alerts on Ryan's account, the altered contract language, all of it encrypted and stored in multiple secure locations. Then I turned to Guardian itself. It was built to withstand outside threats. But now, I needed to protect it from an inside job. Over the next few weeks, I worked double lives. By day, I played the role of the dutiful employee, nodding along in meetings, pretending to consider the executive title they dangled like a carrot. I voiced interest in the promotion, but asked for time to transition responsibilities properly. That bought me precious time. By night, I was building a quiet revolution. Guardian's architecture was my own creation, layered, adaptive, resilient. I knew every line of code, every logic gate, every authentication protocol, and I knew how to embed safeguards so deeply and seamlessly that no one would even realize they were there. What I created wasn't a backdoor. That would have been unethical, dangerous, and easily discovered. No, this was something else entirely. I designed a hidden administrative protocol, an authentication safeguard, buried beneath the core system, impossible to access without the unique sequence only I knew. A fail-safe. If anyone tried to remove me from Guardian's oversight improperly, the system would recognize the breach and restrict critical changes until my authentication was provided. It was fully compliant with the government's insider threat protection guidelines. I even made sure the logic was documented, in vague terms, within the approved technical specs. To anyone else, it would look like just another layer of system security. Meanwhile, I collected more evidence. I began auditing every system Ryan and his handpicked team touched, flagging shortcuts, skipped verifications, and code alterations that directly violated our contract. I documented every inconsistency, every unauthorized commit. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore, I was building an airtight case. One afternoon, Diana looked at me across a quiet lunch and said, "You seem different lately. Focused. Driven." I smiled over my sandwich. Let's just say I've decided to stop trusting the process and start managing my future. What I didn't tell her was that I was preparing for war, and I hadn't even started firing shots yet. Then, 3 months before Guardian's scheduled completion, the attack began in earnest. I walked into the office one Monday to find that my belongings had been moved. My spacious, sunlit office, perfectly situated near the development floor, was no longer mine. I had been relocated to a windowless room on the far side of the building, barely large enough for a desk and a chair. I stormed into Stephanie's office. "Space optimization," she said with false concern. "With the new government contract teams expanding, we need to rethink our floor plan." It was punishment, a warning, but I played along. Then came the restrictions. While reviewing security protocols for a Guardian subsystem, I got an error. Access denied. That had never happened before. I contacted IT. The technician, clearly uncomfortable, said Ryan had implemented a security compartmentalization initiative. My access had been limited to components I was actively working on. "But I'm the architect," I said flatly. "I need system-wide access to maintain integrity." "I'm sorry, Abigail," the technician said. "That's the directive we received. You'll need to submit a request form for expanded access." I submitted one. It took 5 days to process. The following week, I tried accessing logs for an encryption module and got denied again. Ryan wouldn't answer my calls. When I confronted him in the break room, he leaned against the counter, smirking. "Abigail, surely you understand the principle of least privilege," he said condescendingly. "Just submit a request whenever you need something. I'll personally review it." The requests became another layer of sabotage, each one delayed, rejected, or sent back with burdensome questions. Tasks that should have taken hours now stretched to days, and all the while, deadlines remained fixed, or worse, were moved up without warning. During an executive review, I voiced concern. The timeline was no longer realistic with my team gutted and my access throttled. James responded with a spreadsheet and a sigh. "Our financial models require us to deliver early. Every extra week costs us." I wanted to scream. Instead, I made a note in my growing file of violations. Then came the breaking point. A presentation to the Department of Homeland Security was scheduled, a major milestone to demonstrate Guardian's capabilities. I prepared extensively. It was my system, after all. I'd been the face of it from the start. The government expected to hear from me. But the morning of the presentation, Marcus intercepted me in the lobby. "Change of plans," he said, with his usual practiced charm. "Ryan will handle the technical portion today." I stopped walking. "The contract specifically names me. They'll expect to see the architect." "You'll still be introduced," he said smoothly. "But Ryan has a better relationship with Director Peterson. It's just politics, Abigail." I was seated at the far end of the conference table, away from the officials. Ryan fumbled through my work, stumbling on terms he didn't fully understand, misrepresenting protocols, glossing over critical specifications. When Director Peterson asked a technical question about Guardian's authentication hierarchy, I leaned forward to respond. Ryan cut me off. "What Abigail means to say is," he began before I'd said a word. I sat there seething, as my life's work was reduced to bullet points and buzzwords. After the meeting, I confronted Marcus in his office. "Ryan made promises we can't keep. He told the DHS we'd implement zero-delay emergency protocols that bypass security verifications." "Then you'll need to modify the design," Marcus said casually, flipping through a report. "That would violate best practices. It also violates our contract." He shrugged. Ryan assured me it's possible, and the client seemed impressed. Later that night, I checked system logs. Ryan had been working with a small group of developers, separate from my team. They were trying to replicate Guardian's architecture without the core safeguards I'd built in. Their changes stripped down authentication protocols to speed up performance in demos. But in doing so, they created gaping vulnerabilities. I sat staring at the screen, nauseated. This wasn't just betrayal, this was a threat to national infrastructure. That's when Diana called. "You at the office?" she asked, her voice tight. "Yeah, why?" "You need to see something, now." We met at a small coffee shop a few blocks away. Diana slid a folder across the table. "This was misfiled in the internal review system. It's a memo from Stephanie." I opened it. It was a detailed plan to sideline me, step by step. It included the performance documentation they'd been building, the justifications for my promotion, and how they'd present Ryan as my replacement just before Guardian went live. "They want to present it as a seamless leadership shift," Diana said, "a minor change in technical direction. They've even been spreading rumors about your mental health, saying you're paranoid, unstable." I stared down at the folder, feeling my hands tremble. They were planning to erase me, not just from the project, but from the story. I closed the folder. "They think they've already won," I said quietly. But they hadn't seen what I had in store yet. The next morning, I walked into that week's board meeting with purpose. I had prepared a comprehensive presentation detailing the technical risks of Ryan's modifications, charts, logs, documentation, and contractual citations, all laid out with clinical precision. My voice was steady as I began the presentation. By the second slide, James cut me off. "While we appreciate Abigail's attention to detail," he said, his voice cool, "we need to balance technical thoroughness with commercial realities. Her approach, while admirable, is contributing to serious delays and rising costs." Stephanie chimed in smoothly. "And we've received concerns from team members about Abigail's intensity. Perhaps the pressure is becoming too much." I looked around the table, watching the narrative shift in real time. My legitimate concerns were being twisted into emotional instability. Executives who had once praised me now looked uncertain, uncomfortable. After the meeting, as I stepped toward the elevators, James caught up with me. "Budget realities require difficult decisions," he said. "Effective immediately, your team is being reduced. You'll retain oversight, but Ryan's group will take over implementation." I stood tall. "That violates the contract. As principal architect, I'm required to maintain direct control over Guardian's implementation." James offered a thin smile. "Our legal team disagrees. Your title doesn't guarantee you management authority." He walked away, confident in their interpretation. They had just made a fatal mistake. That night, I finished implementing the final phase of my contingency plan. The hidden administrative protocol, my digital lifeline, was seamlessly fused into Guardian's framework. Even a thorough audit wouldn't detect it as anything unusual. It wasn't a sabotage device, it was a protection mechanism. Once triggered, it would lock out unauthorized modifications while allowing the system to function normally, unless and until my authentication was provided. I backed up all documentation. Ryan's attempts to bypass security, Stephanie's misleading client reports, the company's reallocation of contract funds, everything was encrypted and stored externally. The system was secure, so was my position. Emotionally, though, I was far from unshaken. 8 years. 8 years of devotion to TechDynamics, sacrificed weekends, sleepless nights, breakthroughs and setbacks, a lifetime compressed into a corporate timeline, and now they were cutting me loose with a smile and a lie. But they hadn't counted on what I'd built. Friday morning came gray and wet, Virginia rain streaking the windows as I drove into the office. Something in the air was different. Conversation stopped as I approached. Glances lingered a little too long. Then came the calendar notification. Mandatory meeting, 10:12 a.m., executive conference room. No agenda, no names, just a time and a place. I spent the hour leading up to it double-checking my backups, ensuring my documentation was in place. Then, at exactly 10:12 a.m., I walked into the executive boardroom. Marcus, Stephanie, Ryan, and James sat along one side of the long table. A woman I didn't recognize, mid-40s, perfectly composed, sat beside them. A manila folder lay in front of the empty chair across from them. "Abigail," Marcus said, motioning for me to sit. "This is Vanessa Turner from Human Resources." I sat down calmly. My pulse thundered, but my face gave nothing away. TechDynamics is implementing a strategic restructuring, Marcus began, voice practiced and rehearsed, to better align our technical resources with evolving market demands. I bit back a smile. They were actually going to do it. Here, now. After reviewing project requirements and company goals, he continued, we've determined that your position is being eliminated, effective immediately. Vanessa slid the folder toward me. This contains your termination documents and a severance offer of 8 weeks' pay contingent upon your agreement to our non-disclosure and non-disparagement clauses. I opened the folder. It was worse than I expected. They wanted me to sign away intellectual property rights, accept Ryan as the new system architect, disappear. And if I don't sign, I asked, my voice level. Stephanie leaned forward. We strongly advise you to consider this offer carefully. Otherwise, we'd be obligated to share performance concerns with government clients. We want to avoid complications. So that was the play. Threaten my career. Paint me as a liability. Keep me quiet. Ryan leaned back smugly. We'll need your badge and devices before you leave. Security will escort you. I closed the folder without signing. I'll need to review these documents with legal counsel. James frowned. We need your answer by close of business. The offer expires today. Then it expires, I replied, standing. I don't sign anything under pressure, especially not this. Marcus's face hardened. That's disappointing, Abigail. We had hoped to handle this transition amicably. Amicable, I repeated. You're profiting off a system with my name on the contract. Don't talk to me about amicable. He exhaled. The contract is with TechDynamics, not with you personally. I smiled faintly. We'll see. Security escorted me to my office, where I packed my personal items, my MIT diploma, family photos, the Guardian prototype sketches I'd framed. Junior employees peeked from cubicles, some offering quick goodbyes, others avoiding eye contact. The humiliation stung, but I held my head high. Ryan showed up, of course, trying to collect passwords. All credentials are documented, I told him. Anything else requires a formal transfer session, which doesn't seem to be part of your plan today. He scowled. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Interesting choice of words, I said. The security guard walked me out to my car. Rain slicked the parking lot, pooling beneath tires as I loaded my box into the trunk. I didn't cry, not yet, but the moment I closed the car door, the tears came. I had known this was coming. I had prepared. But knowing doesn't soften the blow. 8 years. Gone. When I got home, Oliver, my cat, greeted me with a soft meow. I placed my box on the kitchen table, collapsed on the couch, and let the heartbreak wash over me. Hours passed. Darkness fell. Eventually, I slept. The next morning, I woke with swollen eyes but a clear mind. I sat at my desk, pulled up the contract, the documentation, the system logs, and the contingency triggers. Everything was intact. Diana had been right. Legally, I was protected in ways TechDynamics had either misunderstood or willfully ignored. But I couldn't rely on legal standing alone. TechDynamics had resources. They could delay and deflect until I was buried in court fees. What I needed was leverage. By Saturday afternoon, I had found it. I spent the rest of Saturday deep in research. Not lines of code this time, but attorneys. I needed someone who not only understood government contract law, but wasn't afraid to take on a billion-dollar corporation. By evening, I'd narrowed it down to one name, Catherine Reynolds, a partner at a D.C. firm known for going to war with Goliaths. I sent an inquiry with a summary of the contract details, the system, the termination, and, critically, how I had been named in the contract. Less than 2 hours later, I got a reply. She could meet me Monday morning. Sunday, I turned to the technical battlefield. Guardian was still online, still functioning. My failsafe had been activated automatically after my termination. The system had entered authenticated maintenance mode. That meant it would continue normal operations, but any modification attempts would trigger an authentication requirement from me, the named architect. In the logs, I saw the aftermath. Ryan and his team were already scrambling, trying to patch and modify without understanding why the system wouldn't respond. Every attempt was being logged, every misstep recorded. They had no idea I could see everything from my home terminal. Watching them struggle with the architecture I had built was almost poetic. But I didn't take pleasure in their incompetence. I took purpose from it. By Sunday night, I was calm. I had evidence, leverage, and a meeting with one of the top government contract attorneys in the city. The fire that had burned in me for weeks had transformed. It was no longer about revenge. It was about justice and control. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. Monday would be the day TechDynamics learned just how badly they had underestimated me. At 5:30 a.m., while most of the company's executives were still asleep in their suburban estates, I was already implementing phase 1 of my response. My first call was to Robert Keller, the federal contracting officer who had insisted my name be included in the Guardian contract. I had his cell number, a result of a quiet conversation after a cybersecurity summit. He answered groggily, "Miss Hayes, it's not even 6. I'm sorry, but this couldn't wait. There's been a serious breach of protocol regarding Guardian." His voice shifted instantly. "What kind of breach?" "TechDynamics terminated me Friday. That violates the oversight clause in the contract. Even worse, they've begun implementing unauthorized modifications. I have the documentation." A pause. Then, "Are you able to come to my office this morning?" "I'll be there by 9. I hung up and turned to the next task. Using my administrative credentials, still active within Guardian itself, I accessed the core system. I didn't sabotage anything. That was never my intent. Instead, I formalized the contingency protocol. The system would accept no changes unless verified through my secure authentication process. It wasn't a hidden trap. It was a legitimate protective measure listed in the government-approved documentation, a measure against internal compromise. Then I drafted an email, short, precise, and bulletproof, addressed to the TechDynamics board and their general counsel. I outlined the termination, the contract violation, Ryan's unauthorized modifications, and my legal obligation to secure the system. I attached logs, screenshots, and references to the specific clauses that had been breached. My final line was crystal clear. As the designated principal architect of Guardian, I have activated standard security protocols to prevent unauthorized modifications. I remain open to discussing resolution pathways that honor contractual integrity and national security obligations. I scheduled the email to be delivered at 8:30 a.m., just as they were settling into their offices and discovering that their billion-dollar system wasn't responding to internal commands. At 7 a.m., the flood began. Texts, emails, missed calls. Diana messaged me first. "What did you do? It's chaos in here." Then numbers I didn't recognize, executives, assistants, even Marcus's direct line. I let every call go to voicemail. At 8:15 a.m., I walked into the lobby of Catherine Reynolds' law firm. The top floor overlooked downtown D.C. The receptionist guided me to a corner office where Catherine waited, a sharp, composed woman with gray-streaked hair and a direct gaze that gave nothing away. As I laid out the case, documents, contracts, timelines, she remained quiet, flipping pages with methodical precision. Finally, she looked up. "They really didn't think this through," she said. "Your position is unusually strong. Most government contracts don't name individuals so explicitly. They're claiming my employment agreement supersedes the federal contract." She shook her head. "Not when the federal contract names you as essential to system oversight. Your termination doesn't erase that obligation." She leaned back. "They're exposed. If this goes public, or worse, if system integrity is compromised, you won't be the one with the problem. They will." At 9 o'clock a.m., I arrived at the Department of Homeland Security. Robert Keller greeted me, accompanied by 2 contract specialists, a technical evaluation lead, and DHS legal counsel. For 2 hours, I walked them through everything. My dismissal, the violation of contract terms, Ryan's tampering, the system logs, and my activation of protective protocols. Dr. Chin, the technical lead, raised an eyebrow at the modifications Ryan had attempted. "These shortcuts bypass essential verification steps. Why would anyone—" "To make the system appear more responsive in demos," I said. "But it compromises the entire authentication process." He frowned. "That's not just careless, it's reckless." By the end of the meeting, Robert Keller's tone had shifted. "We'll initiate a formal contract review," he said. "In the meantime, your authority as principal architect stands, regardless of TechDynamics' internal decisions." As I left the DHS building, my phone buzzed again. "Marcus, whatever you want. Name your price." I didn't reply. Not yet. By early afternoon, TechDynamics was in full-blown crisis mode. Diana kept me updated via text. Emergency board meeting. Stock already dropped 7%. Words spreading about problems with Guardian. I smiled faintly. The system I'd built was sound, impenetrable, and now, thanks to their arrogance, untouchable by anyone but me. At 3 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Marcus. I picked up. "This has gone far enough," he said without preamble. His voice was tight, forced calm, layered over panic. "You've made your point." "Have I?" I replied. "Because last Friday you seemed very confident I had no point to make." "Let's not turn this into something petty. We both want what's best for the project." "I agree. What's best is honoring the contract you violated." A long pause. "What do you want, Abigail?" "I want a meeting, tomorrow 10:09 a.m. at Catherine Reynolds' office. My attorney will send the address. Be there. We'll discuss my terms." There was a beat of silence before he replied. "We can meet at our offices." "No," I cut him off. "Neutral ground, legal representation. Those are my conditions." He exhaled sharply. "Fine." That night, the headlines started trickling out. TechDynamics faces scrutiny over government contract. Security concerns at $3.4 billion infrastructure project. The press didn't have the full story, but they had enough to rattle shareholders. By the end of the day, the company's stock had dropped nearly 15%. Catherine and I worked late, outlining my demands. Her advice was firm. "Don't make this personal, Abigail. You have leverage. Use it strategically, not emotionally." We crafted 2 proposals. One would return me to the company with full authority. The other would transfer the Guardian contract to my own firm, where I would continue implementation independently, with TechDynamics receiving only a licensing fee. They could choose. Tuesday morning brought sunlight and resolve. I wore a steel blue suit, my badge of war. As I rode the elevator to Catherine's office on the top floor, I felt the quiet power of someone who had survived the fire and come out sharper. At precisely 10:02 a.m., the TechDynamics delegation arrived. Marcus, Stephanie, Ryan, James, and a silver-haired man I recognized from company events, Lawrence Blackwell, their general counsel. They looked different now. Gone were the smug smiles and patronizing glances, replaced by tight jaws, lowered eyes, and the pale complexion of people realizing they were no longer in control. We took our seats in Catherine's mahogany conference room, the skyline stretching out behind us. Marcus opened the conversation. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. We're all eager to resolve this quickly and discreetly." Catherine didn't flinch. "Let's be clear. Your company unlawfully terminated the individual named in a federal contract, attempted unauthorized modifications to a critical national security system, and triggered protective protocols as a result. This isn't about discretion. This is about accountability." Lawrence leaned in. "We have a different interpretation of the contract's language." "The government doesn't share your interpretation," I said calmly. "They've reaffirmed my role as principal architect, regardless of employment status." Marcus exhaled. "Then tell us what you want, Abigail. Reinstatement? A settlement package?" I opened the folder in front of me and slid a document across the table. "I'm offering 2 options. TechDynamics can choose the one that best suits its interests." Tension rippled down their side of the table as they each took a copy. "Option 1, I continued. "I return to TechDynamics as Executive Vice President of Security Architecture, reporting directly to the CEO. I maintain full authority over Guardian and any related systems, with a seat on the executive committee and a compensation package that reflects my role." Ryan scoffed. Marcus shot him a warning glance. "Option 2. TechDynamics transfers the Guardian contract to my new firm, Hayes Infrastructural Defense Systems. My company will fulfill all contractual obligations. You will receive a licensing fee, but primary control and revenue will shift." Stephanie slammed her copy shut. "This is extortion." Catherine didn't blink. "No, Miss Carter, this is negotiation. Ms. Hayes is offering legally compliant, operationally viable solutions to a crisis your company created." James had already pulled out a calculator. I leaned forward. "Or you can decline both offers, in which case the DHS inquiry will continue. The media coverage will escalate. Your shareholders will learn that you tried to cut corners on critical national security systems and lost access to the only person who can maintain them." Marcus looked at Lawrence, who whispered something. Then he turned back to us. "We need to confer privately." Catherine gestured to an adjacent room. "Of course, take your time." As they left, she turned to me with the faintest smile. "You're holding the line perfectly. They're scrambling." While they huddled next door, my phone buzzed. "Diana. Emergency all hands just canceled. Executives look panicked. rumors flying. I replied with one word: negotiating. After 20 minutes, the TechDynamics team filed back in. Marcus spoke first. We're prepared to accept option 1, with modifications. Executive VP title, direct report to me. Compensation package, yes, but we propose a 2-year review period on the full autonomy provision. I shook my head. Autonomy is non-negotiable, but I'll agree to structured reporting protocols for major system decisions. Transparency, not control. We spent the next 15 minutes hammering out details, defining authority boundaries, setting review milestones, and establishing a public communication strategy for my return. At noon, we had a preliminary agreement. Catherine would draft the formal documents. Once signed, I would remove the contingency protocol from Guardian and resume full oversight. As the meeting concluded, Marcus extended a hand. I hope we can move forward productively. I met his gaze. My commitment to Guardian hasn't changed. Whether we move forward depends on what you do next. Outside the conference room, Ryan tried to catch me alone. You think you've won, he hissed, but this isn't over. Catherine stepped between us before I could speak. Mr. Wilson, any further threats or outbursts will be reported immediately. Ryan glared at me one last time, then turned away. Back at my apartment, the weight of the last 4 days finally began to settle. From discarded employee to executive vice president in under a week. But it wasn't the title that mattered. It was the message. I had not only survived, but reclaimed what was mine. That evening, I finally had a moment to breathe. My phone buzzed with a call from Robert Keller at Homeland Security. His voice was firm but laced with satisfaction. Miss Hayes, I've been informed you've reached an agreement with TechDynamics. Yes, I said. I'll be returning as Executive Vice President with full oversight of Guardian, as stipulated in the contract. Good. That system needs your supervision. He paused. Our preliminary review has also uncovered some irregularities, financial ones. There may be a separate investigation into how TechDynamics handled contract funds. I thanked him for the update and hung up, just as Diana called. With her usual breathless energy, "You won't believe what's happening here," she said. "Marcus called another executive meeting this afternoon, right after Stephanie was seen clearing out her office." "What?" I asked, stunned. "Yep, security was with her. Apparently she's been asked to resign. Ryan's been reassigned to some obscure commercial project, and James is already cooperating with finance over the audit." I sat in silence for a beat. "What did you do?" Diana whispered, half laughing. "I didn't do anything except tell the truth," I replied softly. "The rest, they brought on themselves." "Well, your new office is being prepped," she added. "Corner suite on the executive floor." "I'm coming back Thursday," I said. "They'll need time to communicate the transition properly." By Wednesday afternoon, the transformation at TechDynamics was making headlines. The company released a carefully worded press statement. TechDynamics announces organizational realignment to reinforce security leadership. Abigail Hayes appointed Executive Vice President, Security Architecture. There was no mention of firings, terminations, or contract violations, just the illusion of a smooth evolution. But the industry wasn't buying it. Tech blogs speculated about an internal power struggle. Government insiders leaked tidbits about an architect being sidelined, then reinstated after a DHS review. Behind the corporate spin, the truth whispered its way through the halls. I spent Wednesday preparing. I reviewed Guardian's logs and audit trails. Ryan's team had stopped attempting modifications after the protocol locked them out. I noted every discrepancy, flagged every change, and created a to-do list for my return. Thursday morning, I dressed with precision. The navy blazer, crisp white blouse, simple pearl earrings. The kind of uniform that says, "I've returned and I belong here." As I walked into the TechDynamics lobby, everything felt surreal. This time, no security guards stood by the door, no suspicious glances. Instead, employees paused mid-conversation as I passed. Some smiled, some nodded, others just stared. Marcus was waiting by the elevator to the executive floor. A public gesture, no doubt orchestrated to show unity. "Your office is ready," he said, forcing a smile. He led me to the corner suite that had once belonged to Stephanie. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of Northern Virginia. On the desk sat my nameplate. Abigail Hayes, Executive Vice President, Security Architecture. Diana appeared in my doorway moments later, grinning like it was Christmas morning. "I never doubted you," she said, stepping in for a hug. though I didn't expect such a dramatic resolution. Neither did I admitted. How bad is the fallout? Stephanie's spinning her exit as a career move. Ryan's miserable. James is trying to look helpful, she smirked. But the atmosphere has shifted. There's respect, real respect, and a little fear, too. Good, I said. They should understand what happens when they try to undermine the system, or the woman who built it. Your team is thrilled, by the way. They're already planning a celebratory lunch. I sat down at my desk, running my fingers across its polished surface. Just days ago, I was escorted out like a criminal. Now, I was in charge of the very project they had tried to steal from me. At 11:00 a.m., Marcus held an executive committee meeting to reintroduce me to the leadership team. He did his best to paint my return as a strategic decision, acknowledging my role in Guardian's success, while carefully avoiding mention of the chaos that led to it. New faces now occupied Stephanie and James's old seats. They looked curious, cautious, and, most importantly, open. I spoke briefly, outlining my plan to conduct a full system review, reassemble my original team, and restore transparency to the project timeline. No one challenged me. No one dared. That afternoon, I met with Jessica and Tyler, two of my most trusted developers. They tried to bury us, Jessica said, voice low. Not anymore, I replied. We've got work to do. Guardian's been manhandled. Let's make sure it's still intact. They nodded, ready. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and audits. I discovered several areas of Guardian had been altered, minor tweaks, but enough to warrant immediate correction. I began drafting a memo to government partners detailing the timeline of the recent leadership changes, the protective protocol, and the steps I was taking to ensure full compliance. At sunset, I stood by the window, watching the sky bleed from orange to violet. The view from this office was clear and unobstructed, just like my new role. My phone buzzed with a message from Robert Keller. Contract review complete. Your status as principal architect formally reaffirmed. Financial inquiry still ongoing. Another ping, a news alert. TechDynamics board announces governance review following leadership restructuring. They didn't name names, but everyone in the industry knew who had triggered the reckoning. I had won more than just my job back. I had exposed a system of deceit and replaced it with accountability. As I gathered my things to leave, I felt no gloating, no vanity. Just resolve. Because power, real power, doesn't come from a title or a corner office. It comes from standing your ground when it matters most, from knowing what you've built and refusing to let it be stolen. And now, the people who tried to erase me were gone. The system I had built was once again under proper oversight. And TechDynamics would never forget what happened when they underestimated the woman whose name was on the contract. 6 months into my new role as Executive Vice President, TechDynamics looked nothing like the company I had once walked away from in tears. The toxic hierarchy was gone. The backroom deals, the strategic betrayals, all dismantled, one careful decision at a time. In their place stood a culture built on transparency, accountability, and collaboration. My corner office, once occupied by a woman who saw me as a stepping stone, now displayed multiple awards. Guardian had not only been implemented successfully across federal infrastructure, it was outperforming every benchmark. But it wasn't just about metrics. What mattered most was how people showed up to work now. My executive team was a hand-picked collection of experts, diverse in background and thinking, chosen not just for skill, but for integrity. Thursday morning began with our strategy session. Jessica, who had been unjustly reassigned during the upheaval, now led infrastructure integration. She smiled as she delivered the update. The Department of Energy is reporting a 23% boost in performance since Guardian went live. They're asking for expanded monitoring capabilities across their grid. Excellent, I said. Tyler, how's security handling the scale-up? Tyler, once banished to sales support, now sat as Director of Threat Analysis. He nodded confidently. 3 rounds of penetration testing, 0 vulnerabilities. The adaptive protocols are holding exactly as designed. This is what it should have always been. Innovation without fear, progress without politics. As the meeting concluded and the room cleared, Diana stayed behind. Her presence always grounded me. She was now general counsel, having accepted the role after a full restructuring of the legal department. She had played a pivotal part in stabilizing the company's ethics framework. The final settlements came through last night, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. Stephanie and Ryan signed their NDAs and severance packages, James has fully cooperated with investigators. Any surprises? I asked. She shook her head. Not really, though James's testimony was illuminating. Turns out millions from the Guardian contract were funneled into unrelated internal projects, without disclosure. Major federal violation. I wasn't shocked. Not anymore. Just validated. And Marcus? I asked quietly. Diana hesitated. The board is meeting tomorrow. Rumor is they'll announce his permanent replacement next week. She gave me a look I recognized, cautious but expectant. Your name is at the top of the list, Abigail. I looked away, out the window. It was a strange feeling, being considered for CEO of the same company that had once walked me out like I was disposable. My heart felt heavy with the weight of that possibility. I'm not a corporate politician, Diana. Exactly, she said. That's why you should consider it. After she left, I sat at my desk, lost in thought. 6 months ago, I'd been thrown out like I didn't matter. Now the board was preparing to offer me the reins. Not because I played the game, but because I'd changed it. My phone buzzed again. A visitor was waiting in the lobby. Robert Keller. I met him at the elevators and walked him up myself. Homeland Security had remained in close contact throughout the final Guardian implementation, and Robert had become a trusted partner. We sat in the meeting space adjacent to my office, sunlight pouring in through the glass. The enhancements you added after the transition, he said, are remarkable. Guardian's performance is exceeding every security and operational benchmark. We had the right team, I replied. People who cared about getting it right, not just getting it done fast. He gave a slow nod. That's actually part of the reason I'm here. The administration is forming a critical infrastructure security advisory council. Small, elite. They'd like you to join. I blinked, stunned. You don't have to answer right away, he added, reading my expression. But it's a recognition of everything you've built. Not just Guardian, but how you handled the situation. I thanked him and walked him to the elevator. After he left, I stood alone in the hallway, letting the weight of the offer settle. An advisory role at the national level. It wasn't something I'd ever aspired to, but maybe that was the point. Some things aren't dreams until someone tells you you've earned them. Later that afternoon, I met with Megan, a junior developer from the new cohort. She reminded me of myself at that age. Brilliant, driven, and quietly unsure of her place in the room. She hesitated before speaking. There's something I've noticed. I think there's a flaw in the new biometric handoff module. Show me, I said. She pulled up the code. She was right. It wasn't catastrophic, but it could become a vulnerability under stress conditions. The problem is, Megan continued, when I brought it up in yesterday's review, one of the senior devs brushed me off, said I was overanalyzing. I leaned forward. Megan, technical correctness matters more than rank. Document your concerns, present them clearly, and if someone dismisses you, come to me. She looked surprised. Really? Really. Some of the worst security breaches happened because someone was too afraid to speak up. She nodded, and I could see the shift in her posture, shoulders lifted, eyes steady. Moments like that mattered more than any title. That evening, as I packed up to leave, a familiar knock sounded on my door. Marcus. He hadn't set foot in this office since his return from personal leave. Time hadn't been kind. His hair was grayer, his posture more slouched. There was a hollow look in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Do you have a minute? He asked. I gestured to the chair across from me. He sat slowly, glancing around at the office that had once belonged to his closest ally. I'm stepping down, he said quietly. It'll be official tomorrow. I said nothing, just waited. I came to say, well, an apology probably doesn't cover it. No, I agreed, but it's a start. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in a long while. I underestimated you. I saw you as a technical asset, not a leader. That was my failure. I let the words hang in the air before asking the question I had carried with me for months. Why, Marcus? We built something extraordinary. Guardian was revolutionary. Why risk it all? He exhaled. Pressure, growth targets. Stephanie convinced me we could keep the contract without you. Ryan said he could replicate your system at a lower cost, and I believed them. I didn't respond right away, because the truth was, I understood. Not the decisions, but the fear. The desperate scramble for control. I had just never expected him to surrender his judgment to it. The board wants you to consider the CEO position, he said, standing to leave. For what it's worth, I told them you're the right choice. After he left, I turned toward the window. The city lights flickered in the distance, like static on a dark screen. Somewhere out there, people were going about their lives, unaware of the wars fought behind glass walls and glowing monitors. 6 months ago, I was the woman they tried to erase. Now I was the woman they were asking to lead. And I wasn't sure which was more surreal. The evening after Marcus's visit, I stayed at my desk long after most of the building had emptied out. I didn't want to go home, not yet, not while everything felt suspended between what had been and what might come next. The city outside glimmered in rows of amber and white, as if the skyline itself were waiting for a decision. My phone buzzed again, a message from Jessica. Team celebrating at Riverside Grill. You coming? I hesitated, then replied, on my way. When I arrived, they were already gathered around a large table, laughter rising above the soft hum of the restaurant. These were the people who had stayed through the storm, who had believed in the system we were building, even when I was no longer at the helm. Jessica spotted me and raised her glass. To the only name on the contract. Everyone cheered. Speech, Tyler called. Others joined in. I stood, smiling as I looked at the circle of faces. So familiar, so loyal. I want to thank all of you, I began, not just for your brilliance, which is undeniable, but for your integrity. They quieted. What we build protects real people, millions of them. Hospitals, transportation, energy grids. The responsibility we carry can't be overstated, and I've learned, through all of this, that technical excellence is only half the battle. I paused. The other half? It's knowing your worth, and refusing to let anyone diminish it. Nods circled the table. A few eyes glistened. We are not interchangeable cogs in a corporate machine. We are individuals with irreplaceable insight. What happened to me, what happened to all of us, wasn't just about power. It was about people forgetting that. A hush lingered after I sat back down. Then Megan raised her glass. To the architect of not just Guardian, but our team's future. Clinking glasses echoed across the table. That night, walking alone back to my car under a canopy of stars, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Not because the fight was over, but because I'd chosen to carry something greater than resentment. I'd chosen to build, again. The next morning brought news that shouldn't have surprised me, but still landed like a quiet thunderclap. TechDynamics issued a press release. Marcus Bennett steps down as CEO following strategic governance review. Interim leadership appointed as board initiates search for successor. Within hours, my phone buzzed with texts and emails from colleagues, media contacts, even industry competitors. But the message that stopped me cold came from Lawrence Blackwell, TechDynamics' general counsel. The board would like to schedule a meeting to formally discuss the CEO role with you. Can you be available next week? I sat staring at my screen. I'd thought about this, of course. Diana had warned me. Marcus had endorsed me. But seeing the invitation in writing, that was different. That made it real. Later that afternoon, I had another advisory session with Megan. She'd been working on a small, but potentially critical update to Guardian's authentication rollback protocols. I know the feature is technically secondary, she said, but I think it's a potential vulnerability. She walked me through her proposed patch. She was right. I want you to write this up for the DHS enhancement package, I said. Your name should be on it. Her eyes widened. Really? You caught it. You fixed it. You should be credited for it. After she left, I made a note to speak with HR about formally accelerating her promotion path. Empowering others had become the most satisfying part of my role. But that evening, as I reviewed board correspondence and stared out across the skyline, a quiet unease settled in. Becoming CEO meant giving up the technical work I loved. It meant stepping into a political arena I had always resisted. Could I lead at that level without becoming what I had once fought against? That question lingered with me into the weekend. Saturday morning, I drove to a quiet park outside the city. No laptop, no reports, just a journal and a pen. I needed to think. I wrote 2 columns on a blank page. What I love and what I fear. And under what I love, I wrote, and creating systems that protect people, mentoring young developers, solving problems no one else can see, fighting for integrity. Under what I fear, I wrote, and losing touch with the work, becoming too corporate, betraying my principles, failing the people who trust me. By the time I was done, I realized something. The only way to prevent those fears from coming true was to step up and lead differently. Not by becoming a CEO in the mold of Marcus or Stephanie, but by redefining what that role could be. That afternoon, I drafted an email to the board. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the CEO position. I would be honored to meet and explore a vision for TechDynamics rooted in technical excellence, ethical leadership, and resilient innovation. Please let me know a time that works. I hit send. And just like that, the next chapter began. Spring arrived in Northern Virginia with crisp mornings and golden light that filtered through the tall windows of my office. The same office that had once symbolized exile now transformed into a space of trust, clarity, and quiet power. 6 weeks into my tenure as CEO, the company looked and felt different. Gone were the whispered alliances, the hush that used to follow when someone spoke the truth too loudly. Now, people raised concerns with confidence. Meetings were constructive instead of political. And the developers, the heart of TechDynamics, walked with a new kind of energy, one that said, "We matter again." That morning, I reviewed the Guardian expansion reports. Jessica's team had successfully deployed our adaptive threat monitoring to the Department of Transportation. Tyler's simulations had detected a vulnerability in a third-party vendor's software weeks before that vendor issued a patch. Our systems weren't just protecting infrastructure, they were protecting lives. I sipped my coffee and smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because we were finally building with purpose. At noon, Diana entered my office with an update. She carried 2 folders, one marked Confidential Gay Legal, the other Staff Nominations. "Investigation's moving into its final phase," she said, setting the legal folder on my desk. "James has turned over documentation proving that Marcus authorized the fund reallocation. Stephanie's emails, well, let's just say her NDA was very wisely signed." I raised an eyebrow. "Any risk to the company?" "Minimal. The board's cooperation, combined with the cultural overhaul and your reinstatement, have given the investigators confidence. They're likely to pursue action against individuals, not the organization." I nodded. "And the nominations?" Diana tapped the second folder. "Department heads have submitted internal candidates for our leadership development initiative. All departments, including engineering and IT security." I opened the folder. "First name on the list?" "Megan." She had quietly earned the respect of senior engineers, flagged multiple issues before they became headlines, and led a task force that completely restructured the biometric authentication rollback protocols. "She deserves it," I said. "She's you, 10 years ago," Diana said, smiling. Later that afternoon, I met with Megan in the same glass conference room where I'd once been cut out of the Guardian conversation. Her eyes widened as I handed her the nomination notice. "I don't know what to say," she said, nearly speechless. "You've already said it," I replied. "In code, in reports, in the way you carry yourself. You're ready." She stared at the page in silence for a moment, then looked up. "I was terrified when I joined this company." "I was too," I admitted. "That fear, it never really goes away, but you learn to walk through it, to lead anyway." Megan nodded, and I saw it, that spark of belief, not just in herself, but in the possibility of what came next. After she left, I looked at the skyline, those rows of buildings I used to pass on the drive home, wondering if I'd ever reclaim what I'd built. Now the question wasn't whether I belonged. It was what I would do with the power I now held. That night, Robert Keller called from DHS. "Just got out of the White House. Your name came up, again." I laughed lightly. "Should I be worried?" "They're impressed, Abigail. Guardian's performance, your leadership, the way you turned the company around. They're expanding the advisory council into a formal commission on cyber defense strategy. The president wants you on it." I stood in my kitchen, silent for a beat. "Wow." "I'll send the paperwork," he said. "But off the record, this is more than just prestige. You've become a model for how technical leadership should look. This isn't about filling a quota. This is about setting a standard." After we ended the call, I placed my phone down and stared at the ceiling. Me, a woman they tried to discard, now shaping national cyber policy. I wasn't just rebuilding systems. I was rewriting what leadership could look like for every woman, every underrepresented voice in tech who had ever been talked over, cut off, or shown the door. The following morning, I took the elevator down to the development floor, a visit I made every week. I didn't believe in leading from above. I walked through the workstations, stopping to ask questions, review architecture drafts, listen. One developer, a soft-spoken intern named Callum, showed me a simulation he had run on threat mapping anomalies. It was brilliant. I connected him with Tyler that afternoon. That's what real security looks like. Not just digital walls, but empowered people. Later, as I returned to my office, Diana was waiting in the doorway. "There's one more thing," she said, handing me a sealed envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on company letterhead. "And you were right. We forgot who you were. We won't make that mistake again. The board." I placed it gently in the drawer beside my original copy of the Guardian contract, the one where my name stood alone, immutable, irreplaceable. It reminded me of how far I'd come, and what I'd never allow to happen again. 6 months after I accepted the CEO role, TechDynamics didn't just feel like a new company, it was one. Not because we rebranded or made a glossy marketing campaign, but because we rewrote the rules from the inside out. The whisper networks were gone. The corner offices no longer belonged only to those who played politics best, but to those who earned trust, delivered results, and lifted others as they climbed. The metrics spoke for themselves. Guardian was now operational in 17 government agencies. The Department of Energy's system, once plagued with outdated architecture, now reported zero downtime for over 180 consecutive days. The Department of Transportation credited our adaptive protocols with preventing 2 major logistical breaches, and the Department of Homeland Security had formally invited me to help shape their multi-decade cybersecurity roadmap. But numbers were only part of the story. The real victory was quieter. It was in the junior analyst who asked a question in a room full of executives and was heard. It was in the cross-team Slack threads solving problems collaboratively, no titles needed. It was in the sighs of relief I heard from employees who no longer feared retaliation just for doing what was right. I kept my door open, literally and metaphorically. Every month, I hosted a roundtable for anyone at any level to join me for lunch. No presentations, no pressure. Just real conversations about the work we did and how we could do it better. During one of those lunches, Megan shared an idea for a cross-agency simulation platform that could test Guardian's response to simultaneous multi-vector attacks. It was ambitious, complex, with enormous implications. "Let's build it," I said. By the following week, she was leading the pilot. Meanwhile, the DHS Commission had begun assembling. The official title they gave me was Strategic Advisor for National Infrastructure Defense. But it wasn't about a title. It was about impact. One Friday afternoon, I stood at a podium inside the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, facing a room filled with policymakers, federal agency heads, and defense contractors. And I told them the truth. I was nearly erased by the very system I helped create, not because I failed, but because I refused to be silent. I designed Guardian to withstand external threats, but I never imagined I'd need to protect it from internal sabotage. That was my mistake. One I've spent the last year correcting, not just through code, but through culture. Silence filled the room. Then came applause. Not for me, I hoped, but for the principle that had survived the fire. The integrity of those who build must be protected as fiercely as the systems they create. That night, I returned home to a message on my phone. From Robert Keller. "Your remarks hit hard. I had 3 agency heads approach me afterward. They want your voice in the next federal innovation directive." I put down my phone and stared out the window. For the first time in a very long time, I allowed myself a deep breath and a quiet smile. 1 month later, the final Guardian performance report came across my desk. Jessica and Tyler had completed a full resilience audit of the national deployment. Megan's simulation platform had flagged a potential exploit, then proven that Guardian's adaptive protocols not only responded in real time, but learned from it. The system I had once built alone, in silence, under threat of erasure, was now a living, evolving ecosystem, protected by many, stewarded by a team that believed, as fiercely as I did, in doing things the right way. As I signed the report, Diana appeared at the door. She didn't knock anymore. "You're going to want to see this," she said, holding up her phone. It was a live feed from a financial news network. The anchor's voice was crisp. TechDynamics' remarkable transformation continues to inspire industry leaders, with CEO Abigail Hayes now widely credited with redefining ethical leadership in national tech infrastructure. Her rise from terminated executive to one of the most trusted figures in cybersecurity has sparked what many are calling the integrity era of tech. I blinked. Diana smiled. "The integrity era. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" I laughed softly. "Feels like an overstatement." She raised an eyebrow. Not to the thousands of employees you've empowered, not to the government leaders who now trust our systems, and not to the women and men watching who've been told they're too intense, too technical, too difficult, too much. I looked down at my desk, at the old Guardian blueprint framed on the wall, the signed contract tucked safely in my drawer, the photograph of the team from our first system launch celebration. Too much. They used to say that about me. Now they said something else entirely. Essential. Later that evening, I took a quiet walk through the empty building. I paused outside the original development floor, the place where I had started as a junior developer nearly a decade ago. The carpet was different now. The lights dimmed, but the memories were fresh. Back then, I never imagined this future. I just wanted to build something that mattered. Now I had. And still, I wasn't done. As I stood there in the quiet, my phone buzzed. A message from Megan. And we just hit 30 agencies. Simulation coverage complete. Guardians watching. I smiled and typed back. Je m'en. Because systems, like people, don't survive alone. They endure because someone is paying attention. Someone who refuses to look away. Someone who knows their worth and never lets anyone forget it. 6 months later, a quiet ripple of history unfolded across the tech world. TechDynamics, once seen as just another federal contractor with a glossy portfolio and a flawed soul, had become a blueprint for something else entirely, a company where technical brilliance and ethical leadership didn't compete but coexisted, a place where the ones who built weren't hidden in basements or buried in bureaucracy, but were given microphones, decision-making power, and seats at every table. I didn't set out to lead a revolution. I set out to protect a system. But the deeper truth I learned was this. The most critical infrastructure we will ever defend is not built from code. It's built from courage. Courage to speak up, courage to say no, courage to stay when it's hard, and walk away when it's right, and courage to come back when everything told you not to.
Me.
Guardian's impact had become more than national. It was global. Several allied nations adopted modified versions of our framework. Megan now led a multinational task force on real-time threat response. Jessica was working with the World Bank to secure infrastructure in emerging economies. Tyler had joined a UN cybersecurity initiative focused on election integrity. And me? I had just returned from a summit in Geneva where I gave the keynote address on the future of trust in technology. I spoke not just as a CEO, but as a woman who had once been locked out of the room where the decisions were made and had chosen not to build a new door, but an entirely new floor plan. At the closing reception, a young engineer from Nairobi approached me. "Your story gave me permission," she said, "to stop apologizing for being the smartest one in the room." I smiled. Never apologize for that. Just be sure you're also the kindest. We don't need more ruthless visionaries. We need grounded ones. As I boarded the plane home, I thought about that moment again and again, not because it flattered my ego, but because it reminded me of the ripple effect of being seen, being heard, being respected. We often underestimate what it means to be the first to challenge, the first to return, the first to succeed after being told you weren't allowed to. But when you do, you leave a map. Back at TechDynamics, we celebrated the 1-year anniversary of Guardian's full deployment with quiet pride. No parades, no fireworks. Just a team of developers, engineers, policy experts, and administrators gathered in the rooftop garden under the stars. Jessica brought cake. Tyler brought his bad jokes. Megan gave a short toast. "To the woman whose name is still on the contract," she said, lifting her glass, "and whose integrity rewrote the story." The clink of glasses followed. I looked around the circle of faces, young and old, seasoned and new. They weren't just my colleagues. They were my proof that it's possible to lead without lying, to rise without trampling, to win without surrendering the best parts of yourself. As the evening wore on, I stepped aside and pulled out my phone. I opened an old file, a backup copy of the original Guardian design. It had been untouched for nearly 2 years. Just seeing the architecture made something swell in my chest. Not pride, not nostalgia, and recognition. This had been my beginning. A system built not just with code, but with principle. I scrolled through the documentation, stopping at the very first page where I had signed my name. Abigail Hayes, Principal Architect. Guardian System, Infrastructure Resilience Network. Still there, still mine. But now that name wasn't buried in contracts or whispered in boardrooms. It was a call sign, a message that you can fight back with facts, that you can hold your ground with dignity, that when everything tries to silence you, the best response is to become louder than the system itself. Not with noise, but with proof, with presence, with power. As I left the rooftop and walked down the familiar halls of TechDynamics one last time that evening, I paused at the glass wall overlooking the development floor. It was lit with the soft glow of screens and ideas in motion. And in that moment, I didn't see a company. I saw a legacy, built not on vengeance, but on vision. A legacy that began with betrayal, survived a reckoning, and now stood as a monument to something unshakable, a resilience. And to every woman, every builder, every silent architect, waiting for the world to realize they're the reason the lights stay on, this story is for you. Don't wait to be invited in. Build the system. Write your name on the contract. And never, never let them forget who did.